I'll give you a quick introduction of who I am. I've had a bit of a look at your work, and then maybe take you through sort of the process that at least my firm and I think agencies follow, because certainly having had a look at your work, it is incredibly fundamentally developmentally correct, and where I come from, it's not quite as correct. And it's sort of a commercial, not a commercial reality, but certainly the part of the industry I come from. So my name is Robert. I'm the managing director of sort of a mid-size agency called William. We've been around for about 16,000 years, building websites and applications. So we build commercial websites. Matthew, who's with me, who's our top developer, we just launched a major application for Qantas as an example. We build websites for people like Woolworths, BT, Westpac, all sorts of websites that people plug into, look at, transact with, and the rest of it. We're in an unusual part of the market in the sense that we actually have developers, and we have quite a few developers in our business, and that's an unusual thing and an increasingly unusual thing in the Australian market, in the sense that a lot of it's been outsourced or it's been put overseas, or conversely, it's not taken seriously. So where you are, you're in an exciting position, but it's a tough position as a developer, because it's a tough gig. Certainly in the space that we play. But conversely, if you're good at what you do, and we're pretty good at what we do, it's a really exciting space. You can build out some really good applications, and there's a great deal of respect. So we fit a really nice niche. As I said, on one side you've got agencies that don't care because it's not salubrious to develop, and on the other side it's a big outsourced .NET sort of show. And as I said, the context is building 50, 100, 200, 300, 400,000 websites, which is sort of it's the larger end of the Australian market, but it's mid-tier by any standard. I think maybe a bit about process, because it's interesting. I have this statement that I say. So I started life as a designer. I started life 16 years ago at school as a designer. And I can't program. I did CGI and Perl. I don't know if those are still around. Are they? Yeah, good, very good. That's about as far as I came. And I often say that building it is the easy part. And in fact, I spend 100% of my time explaining to clients the front end part, the strategy and the UX and the experience and the rest of it, because building it is easy. And I feel really bad saying that now with a bunch of people that could kill me at any given stage. But frankly, from my perspective, it is. Anyone can build it. And this is a terrible position to be in, but the people who are the important people surely are the engineers and the architects and the people who have the vision. Building it's just a home builder. In fact, Banger burned down the other day. They couldn't even build that. Like, that's the easy part, surely. But yet, in our business over the last couple of years, and I hope that this is something that you take on board or experience, is that we've found a newfound respect for developers. Yeah, it's true. Which is an unusual thing, because we've started in agencies like mine. It's the heroes, the people that get the lunch with the client are not developers. You would never take a developer to lunch at all. In fact, these are my shirts. I had to dress them up, clean up their head, because developers aren't part of the process. And yet in the last few years we've started this respect. We've started to have a respect about the value of developers and how developers can contribute to the project and the value that they add. And so I'm going to take you through the process, but it's going to be pretty much exclusively the front end part of our process, because there's not much I can comment on the back end. Matt might like to talk a bit about his side of the show. But I think it's important, as somebody who is the managing director of an agency and someone who talks to clients every single day, to see what I see, what I think is important. And as I said, for me, it's all about the front end. It's about the UX, it's about the experience. Because at the end of the day, the person who makes or breaks your application is the user, it's not you. No one cares. It's about the user. If the user can't click, if the user can't download, if the user can't do something, and you look at all these incredibly functionally correct websites, which are so functionally correct, they're not functional at all. A shitload of fields on the page doesn't help anybody. It's about logic and the rest of it. So when we talk to clients, there's two things we talk about. One is commercial success, and we have a process or a methodology internally that we talk about there. Every agency needs to talk about commercial success. What's the outcome that the client's going to get? It's not just to fill in forms, it's to make revenue or it's to do something. And that's the first conversation that any agency has. Developers, in my experience, generally are not part of that conversation. They come in at a lower level, or at a different level. Not a lower, not a less important level, but at a different point. But that's the first conversation in an agency like ours that we have. What do we want to get from this? How are we going to make revenue? If we're competing against an established competitor, how are we going to change things? What are we going to do? All that sort of stuff. The second part of the conversation, though, is about the project, about how we're actually going to execute it, what it's going to look like, how it's going to form together, and the rest of it. And there's two parts to that. In our business, we call that project success. And that's about actually delivering successful projects. If any of you have ever worked on a major web project or any web project, you would know that they're fucking terrible. They fall apart, they have problems. They continuously have problems. They blow out, people scream, they fall out. The number of projects that I would get a phone call, and Natalie's our production director, she answers the phone sometimes for these. I would get 4 phone calls a month from people who've spent in excess of at least 6 figures, whose projects have spiraled completely out of control. It happens every week and every day. So commercial success is a very important thing in the sense that you can describe and articulate success and discuss with the client all the fantastic outcomes, but equally this project success, which is what I'm about to go through, is just as important, because it's all very good to talk about making lots of money and filling in lots of forms and the rest of it, but if we can't get there, who cares? And that is just as equally as important. At the very beginning of the project, as I said, we talk about strategy. We talk about strategy, we talk about what we're going to get, how we're going to make money, who's going to fill in the forms, how we're going to get the traffic and the rest of it. We look at the model that's going to make the site. But the second step is what we call requirements. I know you've seen some of this, and I was interested to see the video that came up before. We've actually discovered that requirements is not necessarily a fantastic thing to do in a web project, but I'm going to take you through this anyway, because it's a little bit, it's prescriptive, but it's not prescriptive enough in a web project. Web projects, it's an important thing. As a developer, you're building out software, so everything is perfectly, at the end of the day, prescribed. As I understand it, you're writing code, you're writing thousands of lines of code, and at the end of the day, it will do exactly what it's told to do. Clients are highly emotional. Websites are hugely emotional things. They don't give a stuff. You tell them that a website is, they don't care that it's a piece of software at the end of the day. And this is, the requirements document is an attempt to try and bridge the two, but it doesn't quite work, because they don't get it. One thing you will learn is that clients are maniacs and they can't read. They don't read things. They can't read. How can you ask somebody who is a project manager to read a 48-page document about things they've never heard of? This is literally like you trying to understand the makeup of a Porsche engine. It's literally this, but they can't see it. These are words. Even definition, how often do you see the word definition? Or document, or requirement? It's a terrible sounding document. It should be called like, script to a, soft porn or something else, a few pages in, as opposed to this. So it's terrible. These are already, we've got a problem. And yet we can only take it to a point that we hope clients can read it. I hope this makes sense. But you need more. And so this is an interesting bridging point. And I'll take you through a little bit of this. So yeah, we've gone through our strategy. We understand what we think we're going to do. We understand who we're going to try and sell it to, who the model is. Next step, let's get the requirements down. This is done by an analyst. So this is done by a business analyst, somebody who goes in and analyzes the business. So in order to achieve this strategy, in order to sell 1,000 prams, or in order to have somebody go through an induction process, whatever it is, what are all the requirements that I need to gather? This can take days, this can take weeks, this can take months. It really depends. Again, it depends on the recalcitrance of the client, it depends on the accessibility information, it depends on clients often making decisions. We've got an interesting project at the moment where the client simply cannot make the decision about how they want to receipt money. We could give them some advice, we could give them some feedback. At the end of the day, it's the client's business. They've got to make this decision. There are other people, they could bring in consultants who might give them that advice, but as the web developer, and you will be part of this process, at the end of the day, you can only give them their options. You need to make that decision. So I'll take you through this document really quickly. This is a large one. This is for a banking client. It's got lots of revisions and lots of names. We'll get past those. Where are we? So you've been talking about use cases. I think use cases, you've gone through some of those. So these are use cases. These are certain functions or certain requirements that a customer has that we can test against. And we write these down up front, so the client says, yes, I get it. And part of it, I should add, part of this commercial thing is you are trying to pin the client. You'd be surprised. People talk about flexibility and sort of the development process and the need to be flexible and the need to be adaptive. Sure, they're not going to be very flexible or adaptive when you get to the other end of the project and you haven't got these things documented. So you want to try and agree on even what you're going to test up front. Even though it seems like something that might be nice to do at the other end of the project, you've got to get this stuff up front. So we put down a couple of tests and then we do some diagrams that look like this. I have no idea what that is, but it is some diagram showing something. It's a what? It's a flowchart. You can tell I'm a designer. This shows 2 stocky blue men who are going to somehow try and get to the end of this process. I think this is that a swimming lane diagram, 2 levels? Anyway, so we do a bunch of these. When we get into these sort of banking applications and finance applications and the rest of it, we need to do some of these. This is probably, at this point, possibly where we would get a developer. But again, analysts in our business, I know the developers haven't seen this, analysts have gone and worked this out. If user enters but not available and so forth, if but it's Tuesday, do this and the rest of it. So we do a few of these. But then we literally jump into requirements. And each of these are documented out. They're given a number, they're grouped together, we determine whether they're functional or non-functional. So this is a functional requirement. A user needs to be able to close their account. That's a functional requirement. It's a piece of functionality. A non-functional requirement would be something like the website must be secure. It's a non-functional. I mean, there's a function there. There'll be lots of functions, but it's a non-functional requirement. We had to document all of these into this document. If you're developing in a truly agile sense, this is by far the only and most important document that exists. Once we understand what we're building, then as developers, you can go away and off you can build. Our industry, for what it's worth, talks a lot about agile. And it's interesting, I made a note that Matt made before, is that the way you have been developing is absolutely best practice. As you move back into the web development space and you're dealing with commercial clients, agile's out the door. It doesn't exist because it can't, because they don't trust you. They don't believe that you're going to come back with a solution that's going to fulfill those requirements. They're going to want a waterfall and go through every single step. So the way you develop, this is critical. The way we develop, it's critical so the client doesn't come back and bite you. That's the reason for building out a doc. It's also very important so we know what we're doing, but you're doing it to defend against the client. You're doing it to defend against the project. So there's sort of an agreement in between. You're not doing it so you can go off into a room and come back 3 months later with a project. So we write down a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of requirements. Users can do this, users can do that. These are the fields. And then we get to an interesting stage. Is that not recording? I hope not. Where are we? All the way on the bottom. Only a developer or an analyst could do this. Anyway, we get to a section somewhere down the bottom called non-functional, and even better. Where is it? Standards, infrastructure. Give me a second. It's a very big document. Out of scope. So what are we not going to develop? And it's important for us to understand this. It's really interesting. We've just taken on a project, we've just scoped a project, and for the very first time, we are not going to build out the first phase of the project until we've scoped the second and the third, which is slightly unusual for us because the third phase is 12 months away, or it could be 18 months away. But we've sort of formed this view that simply putting stuff in outer scope is not good enough. We need to know what that 18-month vision is going to be, what that 12-month vision is going to be. So from a development perspective and a design perspective and a UX perspective, and I'll show you some examples, we're not doing things which are counterintuitive to what we ultimately going to need. So this is the first step in the process. As I said, we go through strategy, someone like myself, a maniac. Second step, we go through requirements, we document all this stuff down. We then move into a prototype. And it was interesting before, I was asking, why is that not logged in? I was asking before, how do you actually come up with the interfaces for the software that you're designing? And the comment that Adam made was, well, we're not really interested in the CSS. I had no idea what he was talking about. Sorry, with respect. I had no idea what he's talking about. What has that got to do with CSS? How do you know what that interface is going to look like? It's interesting, we use a piece of software, or we used a piece of software in our business called Salesforce. And by default, it has 10,000 fields of data that you can fill in. Now, as a user, as a director of the business, the only thing I'm interested in is somebody's phone number. It's the only thing I care about, is their name and their phone number. There's nothing else that interests me that's in the system. Other people in the business are interested in investing more time and effort by talking about possibly an event or an opportunity, or they might mention a proposal or something. So they're putting in more data. And then other people want to record every single phone call within Salesforce. Huge amounts of data are stored. We all see the same interface. Every field is there. The developer's done exactly what was asked. But again, the point I made before is it's so functionally correct. It's not functional. I can't use it. It's just overload. Everything is treated identically. I can edit the name as much as I can edit their proposal. How often do people change names? Once in their life, maybe twice in their life, 3 times if you're not in a good run, 4? Why can I edit your name as much as I can edit the next event or the last email I sent you? And it's all treated identically. So it surprised me that the statement was, well, that's not about CSS. No. When developers decide information design and usability, as far as I'm concerned, we've got a problem on our hands. So what we're about to look at is a prototype, and this is actually where it does become interesting, because for an agency like ours, this is sort of where the rubber starts to hit the road, because we've worked out what the application needs to do. We're satisfied that that is going to deliver on the strategy that we've set. We're going to sell a bunch of prams or cars or whatever. Now we bought a prototype to demonstrate it. The software we use is software called Azure. Hopefully it's going to load up. Maybe it's not, because your wireless down. Haven't paid the bills. Bring it up. So yeah, we use a piece of software called Azure. There's lots of prototyping software out there. I personally use Visio. I don't do much prototyping. There's Balsamic, which I know is very popular. That's sort of wavy line stuff. Azure is sort of the benchmark. This is sort of where it's at. And this is where a UX designer, a user experience designer, has taken all those requirements that you were given and has ignored the statement that Adam made, and he said, all right, I'm going to start to think about how users might interact with that. I'm going to start to think about how people might do this. And that person's sort of saying, well, if people need to log in at different points, well, maybe I can consolidate that into one login point. And maybe from an experience perspective, if people need to do something, I can something. And this is sort of the last bridge before you get into design and development. I'll take you through that. That looks back at strategy and says, well, we want to sell a bunch of prams. The strategy is to do something. So how can I create an interface which will influence that? How can I do something which is going to direct people to do that? How can I lead them? How can I goad them? Simply shooting everything on the page is not helpful to anybody, which is what developers do. Nothing wrong with that. How can I achieve something or build something which is going to help the user achieve their task? Because as I said, the success, the reason I talk about the build being sort of the easy part is that as a user, if I can't log in, well, it failed. It doesn't matter how brilliantly secure or technical our login is or how fast it is. If I can't do it, what does it matter? This is what we call an interactive prototype. We can show all sorts of situations and scenarios. We have versions that are now responsive, so we can show you what happens as you collapse the page and the rest of it. This particular client, in their requirements, needed a travel warning. So this is a travel insurance client called OneCover. And they needed it if there was a cyclone or a typhoon or something, that they could have a travel warning. And that was all, again, that was captured by the analyst, and it's put into the requirements. You can see here we can make it interactive. So we can actually demonstrate how the interface will work. So now I want to travel worldwide, and that will add something here as worldwide. If I choose to go get a quote, that will then take me onto a page which hopefully will have a quote. You'll see these dotted lines underneath that show me where my fold is. So we're starting to think, well, what's above the fold and what's below? There's a lot of people that think that people scroll. Let me tell you, I'm going for the very last time ever, people do not scroll. I've been saying this for 16 years. They don't scroll. The evidence is in 80% of interactivity and attention is above the fold. If you put something below the fold, it's wrong. It's not good. Now, I'm going to have an argument with Natalie in the car on the way back, but it is rare. You're doing very well. Don't tell people to go down the page. Just put it above the fold. But of course, we need different folds now because we have tablets. Thanks to Apple, for the first time in history last year, we went back in terms of screen resolution, thanks to the iPad. We went back in terms of, it's never happened before in IT. Rather than being 16:9 or 16:10, bless you, we now have 4:3 in resolution. So we have to show iPads, we have to show Android phones. In fact, one of our clients is differentiating between the Samsung 4S or the Galaxy 4 and the HTC One and the Nexus and lower grade versions, because behavior is different. People on cheap Android phones are different to people on expensive Android phones. People on an iPhone 5S are different to people on an iPhone 4. How? Oh, right, okay. And how? Yeah, so this prototype here is where a UX designer has taken those requirements and started to put them into an interface that we can test. And when I say test, it's interesting. We actually test it. So we actually sit down with customers and we say, well, up front, we had all these sort of use cases. We needed you to be able to log into internet banking. We needed you to be able to create a new customer. We needed you to create something. Can you do this? And we can actually measure. We use tools and cameras and all sorts of crazy stuff to actually test to see if they can complete it. How long did it take them to complete the task? If they do this, if they do that, what's the message? And it's not just what it looks like. It's also how it talks. It's really interesting. They did a great test on Obama's site, and this might interest you as developers, but where they said sign up now, they got a conversion rate of, let's say, 5%. But when they said learn more, it doubled. So we test all those things. We use multivariate testing to see which of these things are performing. Because again, the client has a strategy to sell widgets or dolls or cats or whatever it is they want to sell, and we've got to do our best to do that. So we've got to test how they're responding and what it looks like and the rest of it. It's interesting where we build into mobile and where we're looking at real application development, and when I say real application development as in web applications, we even look at things like menus, we look at data structures. And this is this is an old example, but this is one where the application had to handle a series, it had to handle photo books, cards, canvases, and frame photos. So one of those things where you upload a bunch of photos, you put them onto a soccer ball or a pack of cards or whatever it is, and then you manipulate it, and at the end, hopefully 10 days later, you get a photo book. But you can see here that they've all got sort of different scenarios, and you've all seen that bit of software. You know when you download software that takes screenshots? And it's got like 3,000 buttons, and it's the worst piece of Windows software you've ever seen, and it's unbelievable. And that's because the dev just kept adding buttons. I need a button that does something. It's because they didn't plan it up front, because they didn't think, well, hang on, in this scenario, what are the features and the functions? So you know sometimes you get that Windows software where you can click a button and nothing happens. You press it and nothing happens. Well, it's not a good experience at all. That's very frustrating for users. And just to put this in context before I show one last thing with menus, there's a great piece of research that was done by Jeffrey Zeldman, who's regarded as sort of the king of usability. And he argues that someone like yourselves, web developers who've got Android phones and you're clicking and flicking and you know everything, before I introduce his point, 95% of all web users that were surveyed in a survey by Google did not know that you could go Control F on a web page. They didn't know you could find on a web page, which is astounding to all of us, 95%. In this usability example, and the reason I'm explaining about this Windows software and the importance of usability, in this test, they showed this girl who described herself as an advanced web user. This is why I harp on about usability. She said, I'm an advanced web user. I use the web every day. I use Facebook. I do all these things. So they showed her a page with a video, and underneath the video it had a QuickTime logo. So she pressed the QuickTime logo 26 times to play the video. And you say, well, what an idiot. Nah, we're the idiots. If she's pressing that button, we got it wrong. So if that's the level of a self-professed advanced user, and I can assure you I've interviewed lots of people who claim to be advanced, getting this stuff right, having buttons that do stuff is actually really important. They don't get it. They don't understand. They're dazzled. And it's not just your mother. We've all seen girlfriends and boyfriends and people just go, I don't understand. I did it. It's not secure. It's not secure. Most people think that the web on their laptop is more secure than their mobile. We know that's completely conversely the case, but they don't. So this is this importance of usability. But that, what I just showed you, can quite potentially in applications can lead to things like menu design. So we actually think about what would the menu of the application look like. Hopefully this loads. It's you or me. It's you. Hopefully it's going to come with some menu design. Is your internet cooling down or something? This is a very effective demonstration. Is this us or them? What I'm trying to show you is menu design. This is a process, this is an example of where we've taken menus, we've taken that information that we were looking at before, that table of information, and we're trying to put it into a framework which allows a designer to think about, okay, well if there's a button that I don't need at this point, if a photo book is treated differently to a canvas, then I'm just not going to show that button. But how do I show the user that the button is not there or should be there, or where would the button be? How do I actually train users that this means forward in the application and that means back? Which is how in usability you fall into these principles of sort of step-by-step, helping users through the process. Again, Salesforce, shoot, 3,000 fields on a page. It doesn't help me at all. So you've got to lead me through it. Lead me, take me, do something. I don't know. Take me through the process. So we've got the prototype. We've done our requirements. Open up a new tab. We've done our requirements. We had a look before at, no, it's your internet. We had a look before at sort of this example of a insurance site. So the next step, we've done our prototype. We're starting to possibly talk to developers at this point, particularly front-end developers, about, well, we need the page to do this and whatever. But generally speaking, in a sub $150,000, $200,000 project, we're not really talking to developers yet. And that's not a good thing, but we're sort of going, well, they'll just develop it. And this is that issue I spoke about before, developers being sort of stage 900 in the process. it can just be built. But we're learning that we should start to talk a bit better, and this is part of your role, is to educate your employers about the fact, well, actually, I've got a lot of value I can add at this point. Because looking at this stuff, you go, actually, I can make that faster, I could do something, or whatever it happens to be. So that's an important step, and it's one, as I said, I think our business is starting to take. But let's click in, we'll have a look at some design. Hopefully we'll look at some design. There we go. So the next step then is for a designer to take the prototype and to start interpreting that. In some instances, it is literally interpreted, because it has to be. If we've gone through enough of a UX process where we've decided the weight and the structure of all the assets that are going to fit on the page, then a designer is asked to quite literally, please keep within this structure. These things are above fold, these things aren't. We're no longer leaving it to designers. Designers can't interpret strategy, it's not their role. When a client says, oh, it's really important that my designers and developers understand my business, it's not important. They don't know and they don't care. They've got their own job. They're going to try and make your website work. They don't want to understand your business. Which literally, you fall into design. And in this instance, we're looking at not a final design. The designer in this instance is throwing assets onto the page. They're literally just throwing things onto the page. They're trying to come up with all of the different styles that they might reuse. So they're playing with icons, they're playing with images, they're thinking about whether things are readable, they're thinking about how it would be responsive, how would these things collapse and pull back together, how are these things, well, interestingly, designers don't care about page speed or page load. Our designers don't. If they can get over 5 or 6 meg homepage, they high five. It's for our developers. Nah, designers are the worst. Trust me, they're worse than developers. So they're throwing up all these different ideas, and in fact, what they're ultimately coming up with, I'm just trying to think of a client where we might actually have some, actually, if we look at something like, actually, Classroom is a good example. You can actually see the size. It's funny, we do all the, a bunch of the Woolly sites, your Big W's, we designed out Dan Murphy's. There are 265 individual templates in the Dan Murphy's website. Every error page, everything has to be prototype and designs. People are often surprised. I'll show you here, we'll look at the main site, search results. That's every potential template that can exist under there. Profile, write, review, rating. Bring that one up, whatever that's going to do. There's a template. I go to the next. So every template, every iteration, they're different. Every iteration is designed out by a designer. And again, is it above fold? It looks a bit cumbersome on this screen because this is a low-res screen. Every single iteration. What does mobile look like? So we'll have a quick look at mobile. Something called footer. So we'll look at home menu. Interestingly, you'll see that's a really big mobile page. So that looks really wide. I think we do them at 640 now. That's because of your HD screens. So if you're doing your low-res 320 sort of design across, that's going to look like a piece of crap on a Nexus or whatever that device is. So we brought out some big designs. At this point, though, we've got 250 pages is where we start to talk to developers. Now, in our business, we have 2 sorts of developers. Well, we've got 3 sorts of developers. You have solution architects. They're like the queen bee of the developers, not to be disturbed. You then have front-end developers. And we have front-end developers that just do front-end, and every time they even think of doing anything close to the .NET, they're pushed back. The only challenge with front-end developers is they become, is anyone here a front-end developer? They become strange. They become very strange over time. And what I mean by that is they become temperamental and very protective of their code. So if you're doing back-end development, I'm not saying this facetiously because I have worked with a bunch of front-end developers, get them to write standardized JavaScript, standardize other stuff. Coming up with their own stuff doesn't help anybody because nobody can edit it. I'm serious, I'm not joking around. I will go to death row with that statement. So you've got your front end, and then you've got your back end developers. At this point, we're handing all these assets across to the front end developers, and they're starting to think about how these things will transition, how will menus open, how will things do things. And in a business like ours, there's sort of there's a clear drop over in the average project. We've done our strategy, our requirements, we've got a prototype, we've tested, everyone's happy, it looks good, we've done some beautiful design, everyone likes it, the colours are right, boom, we sliced it up, and then we just basically throw it over the wall to the developers, which is where you come in. I've never been over that wall, but that is literally in an agency like ours where it's at. The commercial reality, and Matt could tell you, Matt's 18, This is the weather that I web designer of his age of weather. Development is an interesting thing in an agency like ours. So we're a .NET business. We build out some very interesting applications. The work that Adam is taking you through is literally best practice. It brings tears to your eyes, and it would be amazing if these practices and these methodologies continued in the businesses you work at. We are always working towards it, but you never quite get there. You never quite get there because, one, interestingly in the development market, and tell me if I'm talking out of turn, but in the development market, my experience is that there's a bunch of developers that don't care. It's a job. They don't care. They don't care. They're not passionate. They don't want to learn. There's no incentive to learn MVC3 versus MVC4 versus MVC5. So that's sort of the first challenge. The second is the reality of it. You know, the first place that I cut budget is out of dev. A week to log in? 2 weeks for a blog? Are you kidding me? WordPress, just plug it in. You know, just insulting statements like that. It's simple. No, they just got to log in. Fucking log in, just do it. Yeah, that's where it happens. So all your MVC and I don't know whatever else it is you're programming, that's a reality in businesses like ours. Just to put some context as well, so you don't lynch me as I try to leave. They're all coming towards me, camera. Goodbye, Mum. There are sort of 3 or 4 places you can sit. The web development market is sort of, if you are a developer, it's broken into 2. There are serious agencies and there's crap. It really is. Most of it is crap. Where SSW sits is at the absolute nose end of the next section, which is the development house. And that's a very interesting space to be. Lots of development, not a lot of this UX stuff. There's prototype and this front end stuff you haven't seen, and that's because it's not relevant to an SSW. The quality of the code, the SharePoint, the theorem of Microsoft is not on our radar. We're close, we like it, but it's just not. There's too many other battles that we've got to struggle with. Your third option is to work for a corporate. So you go work for a business and you work in that business. That's right. Well, that's up to you. But you can go work in a business, and that's lots of fun. You're not really surrounded by developers, and they don't care which way is up. The advantage there is every time they try to threaten you, say security. And they go back down. It's easy. I've seen it a million times. Yeah, security. Oh, shit. All right, he's got us. And the fourth is a bank. Best of luck to you. Banks are very slow. Everyone who has ever come to work for us in our business, which is intensely high-paced, with huge amounts of turnover, ridiculous deadlines, calls coming in 24/7. We've got a support number that we no longer answer because it's always ringing. If you work in a bank, it's always calling. It's calling now. If you work in a bank, you will experience none of that. But I would suggest that there is somewhat of a rush of being in a firm like an SSW or a firm like ours, where lots of different projects, surrounded by developers. Yeah, you've got to learn to compromise. That's a reality. You've got to learn to compromise, because in a business like ours, it's just you can't. You got to hack stuff together. You know, true MVP. And this is the last thing I'll say. I'm working on a project at the moment, and this guy's flipped 3 businesses. It's really interesting. He's flipped 3 businesses for 30 million each. He's a really interesting guy. He's just turned 40. Really interesting guy. And we've taken on this project. And even my minimum standards as a showman and a designer, this guy he's not even half of that. He just goes, fucking hard code it. Get it to market. That's what true MVP is. Fuck around, get the thing to market. I'm not interested in but I don't care. I don't care how you get this thing up, because the longer we're talking about it, the less time at market. And that is one extreme. That is the commercial. I don't give a stuff about you. No. He would skip prototyping if he could. He'd skip everything if he could. So that is one extreme, and that's that compromise. But as I said, if you can take sort of these standards that I've observed today, which are incredibly impressive, and congratulations, if you can take these sort of standards and these platforms to market, if you can push further up the chain and have these discussions and arguments with your employers to explain the importance of this stuff and understand how to compromise in the middle, then you'll certainly do very well. And I think that's it. Very good. So have you got any questions or knives? Yes. Oh, there's a microphone that's going around.
So you showed a prototype earlier in the presentation.
Yep.
How long does it take to create a single screen with that interactive prototype?
It depends. The web development market, so UX designers, I was talking to a friend down in Melbourne, and he said this whole UX gig has probably got another 12, 18 months to go. So this is the hottest part of the internet right now, is sort of the UX side, just as a statement. So everyone's into it. $180,000 guys just coming up with interfaces. Everybody knows usability, right? It's all that sort of gig. UX in a web development firm, and particularly in, say, a bank, everything is highly, and I'm coming to an answer, everything is compartmentalized. So strategy guys wear cufflinks and big checkered shirts, they do a strategy, they disappear. No one ever hears the strategy again. Then some UX guys come along and they put together a prototype like this, completely out of touch with the requirements, completely out of touch. Everyone's sort of in their own sort of streams. Something like this, if there is no support, if there isn't workshopping and a proper process up front, and often there isn't, to do a single page could take a day, 2 days, 3 days. You have to have an information architecture, so you have to have a concept of a structure. You certainly need to understand the broader requirements. Once you've got your key templates done though, then you certainly start to move. We generally, for a site, say like this, where I can go and I can, add different sorts of quotes. I think there's 7 sorts of quotes. I can go and buy the product. We've got some scenarios here where I can look at different versions. So this will be for my A/B split testing. I can send the quote. Down here I can then do something. I can buy it. Something like this is probably 2 weeks of work, but that's had a lot of workshopping and planning up front.
The follow-up question is couldn't a good front-end developer build a HTML prototype in the same amount of time? So rather than having it in another software, but have you ever tried that approach? So instead of using it in another software, actually having because I just know working, because it's not my bag, like it takes me ages to make anything look decent, but I know we've got our front-end designers could put something together like that works roughly in a couple of hours. So
no, that's a fair call. So there's many. If we just go back, if we just replace this, it's a good point. At the end of the day, however, I think the HTML comes out is probably not the point. It's who's doing the HTML. Front-end developers, in my experience, are not driven around usability. They're driven around taking a design or an interface and then converting that into something that's going to perform on a browser or whatever it happens to be. So our UX designers are analytical. They think about users, they test and talk to users, they look at process flows. In fact, I brought this one up before, I thought I brought it up before. They look at customer journey maps, so they do proper journeys and process flows if the customer does, and the rest of it. So I think, and you also start at a very high level. When we build out a prototype like this one here, and you can see the number of pages that are involved, so it's on a huge site, we start at a low fidelity, we're just throwing things on the page. And so I think it would be possibly quite inefficient for a front-end developer to start developing and then developing. They don't start at this point, they're just literally throwing some boxes. A homepage needs a search. I'm not going to resolve what it is that the search has or what the carousel. I know people need to quote. I'm not going to worry about what that means, I just know they need to quote. And so this software here is very efficient from our perspective at sort of building it up. Other point is that we can give these files in theory to clients, so they can then work on it and hand it back without them needing technical skills. So I think it does happen on a layer before. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Thoughts? Simon? No? Yes?
How do you see the complexity of front-end developers, particularly where there's more complexity now of tools like client-server processing there, where it's not now that so much a front-end and a back-end, it's almost merged to be, products like Angular. It's very hard to differentiate where's the front-end developer and where's the back-end. How do you see these trends affecting the way organisations work?
You stumped me. The answer is and I think I might get mad up in a second. The answer is I don't. It's interesting we're having this conversation. I mean, I'm a sort of the last generation of web development where there were very distinct layers of web design. We didn't even have tiers in websites. Now, I'm grappling with one client with something called content as a service, where we're splitting out content and making it a service with a proper schema and the rest of it. So the answer is that is a challenge for a business like ours. I don't think it's any more of a threat than it ever was. You know, these things have been evolving, but I don't think it's a challenge for the client. I think it's more a challenge for someone like us. And the fact that I haven't got my head around it, you know, someone showed me as a bit hub or bit bootstrap or something like that, I don't know. That's where you lost me. You know, isn't it just some HTML and CSS? I used Dreamweaver 1, that's where I left off. Something called Style Sheets or something. So literally at that point, you laugh as you are, that's where I left off. Do you have a...
Oh, well, I was just going to say that, you know, within our business...
Oh, sorry, you need a microphone.
Sorry. I was just going to say that within our business there isn't quite the ability to specialise as much as there once was, with that front end and back end coming together more. You know, we do go through the slicing process whereby the designs are turned into HTML, but then where that sort of ends and back end development starts is getting a more and more blurred line. We generally try and get, you know, sort of, what would you call it, the wow factor, you know, any sort of animations and all of that sort of handled by the front end developers, and then we get the back end developers to do the you know, more functional logic that goes into the front end. So, you know, we do require that we have developers that can do JavaScript, that can do all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was hoping to bring up one that we've just done for remove the what? Get rid of that at and symbol. See if this works. This one is interesting. This is what? Get rid of visit.
No, just the last.
Oh, get rid of everything. See, I'm not the team. Yeah, this is a really interesting project. And when we talk about usability, I probably shouldn't be showing you this, but I definitely shouldn't be showing you this. This is a really interesting project. This project, just to put just to focus again on the usability side, I'm going to bring it back there because you're asking dev questions. This is a 2-year project where the client is simply experimenting with how customers interact with the front end of financial products. For them, it's interesting. If I use someone like BT, they're a very big business owned by Westpac. Dev is maybe one line of the conversation. It literally is one line. All they talk about are customers. They've got people called ethno-sociographicists or something who go and sit in businesses sit in homes and just observe, literally just observe how people watch TV and how they respond to TV ads about product. And what we're looking at here is, you know, I'm saying, well, you know, my investment time frame is 5 years. And medium risk. So for myself, I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. I need to send them to school, so medium risk. And that takes me down to some concepts. Doesn't quite fit the screen. This came out of design. When you talk about specialization, design dealt with the slice and the animation of this one. They didn't even bother putting it through. And that's because they are owning this project. So where you talk about the morphing over, particularly for a project like this, I mean, you can't, you know, this has gone through UX. I don't think this has even gone through requirements. It's sort of, you know, it's sort of that specific. Any other questions about usability? About our food day? We have our food day this afternoon. That's the other advantage of being in an agency. Last night I made 4 different sandwich fillers, including poached chicken. I spoke to Adam at the time. So one advantage of not working at a bank is that every quarter you get to go off and drink beer and eat a shitload of food in the afternoon. It's one advantage to working in an agency. If there's no more questions, thank you for your time. Oh, yeah.
One more technical question.
Yeah.
I think he's asking you that.
Yeah, you should. So, and it's kind of a continuation on from Keith's question about Angular, is that we're seeing, I'm just curious about what your, like on your tech stack, what tools you're using to deliver these large websites and to deliver, because, you know, these kind of sites are requiring really responsive, you know, we're seeing more and more requirements to develop SPA-like, like single page application-like applications where our server guys are like, we're writing less and less server code and we're writing more and more JavaScript that's just calling into, you know, data that's being exposed from the server. So what's your story, or like what's your take on how that's going, and how are you pushing your guys along that track, and how are you put, you know, where are your, you know, where's that, you know, where are you seeing a push from your clients requesting this kind of thing, or is it the push coming from your developers? And I'm just curious about how you see. I guess the question is, what are you doing now? Where are you going? And what tools are you using?
Okay, so that's kind of a really tricky one because,
That's why I asked.
yeah, because honestly, we haven't picked one yet. We're constantly evaluating the new technologies, and we're trying to take guidance from, you know, where everyone else is going in the industry, but I don't think anybody knows at this stage. We're certainly using a lot of knockout, but honestly, I'm not thrilled with the syntax of it, marking everything up with extra attributes. So it's really the very rapid nature of the agency lifestyle that, you know, what we do for one project isn't necessarily even similar to what we do on the one that starts right after. We just try our best to keep up with the technologies, and yeah.
I'd make two points on that. I think design, it's interesting. I look at our designers, and designers are, I mean, they're an interesting breed, and they certainly, you can see trends in web design. The fact that you read all these articles about trends in web design and where it's going to go, and parallax scrolling and big graphics and blurry and all that sort of stuff, and then suddenly every site looks like that. Now we've all got these scrolling sites, and there's an iPhone in the middle, everything goes through it, and then the iPhone, and we've all seen that stuff. And then next week someone in California will do something different, and suddenly the whole internet will change again. That rate of change, and the fact we've moved away from my design background, from corporate sites, we're now building sites that just don't have navigation. Like, it's they're touch driven. You know, the homepage, the only point of a homepage is to get people off the homepage and into the site. So why are you mucking around with nav when that's the least efficient, most functional way to get them there? Use the screen, use the touch. The second thing I would say is that if you are going certainly into an agency like ours or into the agency space, the rate of change is staggering. And it's not just the technology that I don't really even know about, but client demands. I write an article every year, the top 10 things I heard. Content is now the most important thing to clients. It's the only thing people can interact with. And I was in a meeting the other day, and they're asking me, you know, why? In fact, I was apologising to a client yesterday because I said we're changing our process because it's no longer working for startups in this. And I said, well, why haven't you worked it out? And you go, because it's changing every hour. You know, your expectations and what you're seeing, and the rest of it is just, it's constantly chasing. So if you're sitting to be a developer, you have to accept that it doesn't end. And as soon as you think you're on top of it, the next wave of expectations and requirements and design and development, and God knows what comes with you, you know. So if you're not the best, that's why you've got to be, that's why you're doing this. You've got to be the best so you can demonstrate, well, I'm going to keep ahead of this, otherwise you get washed up and nobody cares. Sorry.
Are you finding now any clients asking you to bake in a lot of the metrics into their sites to sort of see what are the functions that are used a lot, or I want to do A/B testing on various ones, and using the market to work out how good your usability is rather than the upfront design?
Yeah, there's not a lot of stats. There's not a lot of openly accessible stats about what benchmarks are in terms of usability or conversion or acquisition or something like that. People have rough views of what sites should do. Certainly, there's no question in the last 12, 18 months, the fact that people know whether their rate of conversion is up or down is certainly increased, and that's an impressive thing. In this article I wrote in December last year, I said the fact that people are talking about it is probably the best thing. The problem is that nobody unless you're BT or Westpac, where you have big digital teams with analysts and people who care, who owns it? You know, a marketing person's meant to own analytics. They're not analytical people, they're marketing people. So people haven't owned it. At least now there's an appreciation that we need to. We probably, I'd say for every 50 clients, we have 2 would use A/B split testing, maybe 3, and even that's on the periphery of their sites. Clients are starting to roughly talk about personalisation, but as soon as they realise what a roaring beast that is, they're backing away. But I'd imagine within 12 months that's going to be a much firmer conversation. It depends on the sophistication of the client, and at the end of the day, I mean, think of lighting systems in the building. I mean, how sophisticated are the lighting systems? The top 1% of businesses will have efficient, you know, amazing lighting systems, and the rest won't. It's like websites, you know. It is a very long tail of clients that get it, but they don't sort of, you know, get it. E-commerce clients are very driven by it, but financial clients, some of them will invest enormous amounts of money and hope it fails and not really even measure if it has or not. sort of gut feel and things like that. I think it was the, financial clients only have a mountain of money as well. So, it doesn't work, so we'll see you at lunch. It's the truth. We love them. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Thank you. Thank you for your time. Hope it made sense.